the mysterious cat in her photo, and the memories it brought back. The October wind whispered through the streets of Astoria, Oregon, carrying with it the scent of salt from the Columbia River and the earthy perfume of fallen leaves. Tasha Merrow stood on the sidewalk, her silver-streaked hair caught in the gentle breeze as she gazed up at the pale blue building before her. The Riverside Senior Community Center looked welcoming enough, with its freshly painted trim and flower boxes still showing the last blooms of the season. At 62, Tasha wasn't quite ready to call herself a senior, but after 4 decades as a nurse in Portland's busiest hospital, she'd earned the right to slow down. This part-time job coordinating activities at the center seemed like the perfect opportunity to ease into whatever came next. Her first day, she murmured to herself, adjusting the collar of her. She'd chosen it carefully that morning, a soft blue-gray that matched her eyes, warm enough for autumn but not too casual. It had been years since she'd cared about making a good first impression. On impulse, Tasha pulled out her phone, a newer model her daughter had insisted she needed, and held it at arm's length. The morning sun caught her face at just the right angle, softening the lines around her eyes that spoke of both laughter and tears. "For posterity," she said, smiling slightly as she pressed the button. The camera made its artificial clicking sound, capturing the moment in less than a second. With the photo taken, Tasha slipped the phone back into her purse and headed inside. The center's director, Martha Holloway, a robust woman with a crown of tight white curls, greeted her with enthusiasm. "Tasha, right on time. We're all so excited to have a former nurse on staff. The members will just love picking your brain." The morning passed in a flurry of introductions, tours, and explanations. By lunchtime, Tasha had met dozens of seniors, most of whom seemed genuinely pleased to see a new face. As she sat in the break room nibbling on a sandwich she'd packed, Tasha remembered the photo. She pulled out her phone, planning to send it to her daughter and son in their family group chat, a modern concession to their busy lives that kept them connected despite the distance. Opening the image, Tasha was about to attach it when something made her pause. She zoomed in, her fingers pinching the screen to enlarge a section of the photo she hadn't noticed before. There in the lower left corner, perched on the old wooden fence beside the building, was a cat. Not just any cat, a grey feline with thick fur, slightly folded ears, and amber gold eyes that seemed to be looking directly at her, even through the digital image. A chill ran through Tasha's body, settling in her stomach like a stone. That exact spot on the fence, was where her sister Celine used to wait for the school bus every morning when they were children. In a different town, in a different time, but the posture of the cat, the way it sat so still and watchful, mirrored her sister's stance in an old photograph Tasha hadn't looked at in years. Her hand trembled slightly as she attached the photo to the group chat and typed, "First day at the new job. Astoria is as beautiful as I remembered." She hesitated before pressing send. Should she mention the cat? No, they would think she was being silly, or worse, that age was making her sentimental. She sent the message without comment. Less than 5 minutes later, her phone pinged with a response from her niece, Miranda. "Who's the cat in the photo? Did you make a friend already?" Tasha stared at the message, her throat suddenly dry. So it wasn't just her imagination. The cat was real, visible to others. But why did its presence in that particular spot feel so significant? As she walked home that evening, Tasha took a different route, one that passed by the spot where she'd taken the morning's photo. The fence stood empty now, no sign of any cat. But as she paused to look, the streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across the pavement. In that moment, a memory surfaced. Celine, at 10 years old, balancing precariously on that same style of fence, arms extended like a tightrope walker. "Look, Tash, I'm a statue of a cat," her sister had called, arching her back and narrowing her eyes in a perfect feline impression that had made 6-year-old Tasha dissolve into giggles. The same fence where, years later, they'd hidden Micah, their forbidden pet, wrapped in a faded towel. "If you promise not to cry, I promise we'll find another cat someday," Celine had whispered, wiping away Tasha's tears with gentle fingers. But they never did find another cat. And now, decades later, in a different town but with the same style of fence, this grey feline had appeared, on Tasha's first day of her new beginning. As she turned toward home, Tasha felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of something that had been tightly wound for too long. Whether it was coincidence or something more, she couldn't say. But for the first time in years, she felt curious about what tomorrow might bring. And somewhere in the gathering darkness behind her, a pair of amber eyes watched her go. Dawn arrived with a thin drizzle that beaded on Tasha's kitchen window as she prepared her morning tea. She had slept fitfully, dreaming of Celine, not as she had been in her final days, thin and pale in a hospital bed, but as the vibrant girl who had once raced Tasha to the creek behind their childhood home, her laughter echoing through the trees. Tasha's hands moved automatically through her morning routine: tea with a splash of milk, toast with a scrape of butter, hair pinned back from her face. But her mind was elsewhere, stuck on that image from yesterday's photo. The cat on the fence, the same fence where Celine used to wait. "Don't be ridiculous," she told herself firmly, rinsing her cup in the sink. "It's just a stray cat. Sao Storia probably has dozens of them." Still, she left her apartment 20 minutes earlier than necessary, taking the same route to work as the day before. The rain had stopped, leaving the world fresh and gleaming. As she approached the community center, Tasha slowed her pace, her heart quickening despite her best attempts at rational thought, and there it was. The same grey cat, sitting in the exact same spot on the fence, its thick fur slightly damp from the morning rain. It sat motionless, its amber gold eyes fixed on her as though it had been waiting. Tasha stopped, her breath catching. This close, she could see details she'd missed in the photo: a small nick in one ear, the slight copper tint to its whiskers, the way its tail curled perfectly around its paws. "Hello," she said softly, feeling only mildly foolish for speaking to a stray animal. "Are you waiting for someone?" The cat blinked slowly, a gesture Tasha remembered reading somewhere was a sign of feline trust or affection. It made no move to approach her, but neither did it retreat when she took a tentative step closer. They regarded each other in silence for what felt like a long moment. Then, with deliberate grace, the cat rose to its feet, stretched, and jumped soundlessly from the fence, disappearing into the shrubbery beyond. Tasha released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The encounter had lasted perhaps 30 seconds, but it left her with an unsettled feeling she couldn't quite name. Not fear exactly, but a strange sense of recognition, as though she'd met an old acquaintance after many years. That evening, after a day spent organizing a new watercolor class for the center's members, Tasha found herself pulling out a dusty cardboard box from the back of her bedroom closet. It had moved with her from Portland, but she hadn't opened it in years. Perhaps not since before her divorce 15 years ago. The box was simply labeled "Memories" in her neat handwriting, a testament to her practical nature. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper that had yellowed with age, lay the artifacts of her earlier life: her nursing school graduation pin, a dried corsage from her senior prom, a stack of birthday cards from her children when they were young enough to draw wobbly hearts and misspell words, and photographs. So many photographs. Tasha's fingers trembled slightly as she sifted through them. School pictures of her children, vacation snapshots, her wedding day. She set these aside, moving deeper into the layers of her past until she found what she was looking for. A small album bound in faded blue fabric, its pages stiff with age. On the cover, in childish handwriting, Tasha and Celine's special book. She opened it carefully, as though it might crumble under her touch. The first few pages contained treasures only children would save: a movie ticket stub, a pressed flower, a feather found in the yard. But halfway through she found it. The photograph. Celine, 10 years old, sitting proudly on the wooden fence outside their childhood home in Seaside, just 30 miles from where Tasha now lived. A blue ribbon tied in her dark hair caught the summer sunlight. At her feet sat Mika, the tabby cat they had rescued from a storm drain and hidden from their father for nearly 3 weeks before he discovered their secret and gave the cat away. "If you promise not to cry, I promise we'll find another cat," Celine had said. But life had intervened. Their mother's illness, their father's increasing strictness, then college and careers and separate lives. Tasha ran her finger gently over her sister's face in the photograph. Celine had been gone for 7 years now, taken by the same cancer that had claimed their mother decades earlier. In her final weeks, delirious with pain and medication, Celine had spoken of childhood moments Tasha had nearly forgotten. Building fairy houses in the woods, staying up late to watch meteor showers, the summer they'd learned to swim in the cold Pacific waters. "Remember the cat we saved?" Celine had asked one evening, her voice thin but her eyes suddenly clear. "I always felt bad we never got another one. It had seemed such a small regret amid the larger tragedy of a life ending too soon. But now, looking at the cat in the photo and thinking of the grey feline on the fence, Tasha felt a strange connection forming. That night before bed, she found herself taking out a small saucer and filling it with milk. She placed it on her small porch, feeling slightly foolish as she did so. The grey cat had been nowhere near her apartment building. There was no reason to think it would find its way here. Nevertheless, as she turned out her light and slipped under the covers, Tasha found herself hoping that it might. She dreamed of Celine again that night, but this time the dream was different. They were both adults, sitting together on a porch swing, watching the sunset. A grey cat lay stretched between them, purring contentedly as they stroked its fur. "Did I told you we'd find another cat?" Celine said, smiling. When Tasha woke the next morning, the saucer on her porch was empty. The cat continued to appear at the fence every morning for the next week. Each day, Tasha would arrive a little earlier, and each day the grey feline would be waiting, watching her with those unblinking amber eyes. She began to look forward to these brief encounters, though the cat never allowed her to come close enough to touch it. "I see you've made a friend," Martha commented one morning when she caught Tasha lingering by the fence. "That one's been around the neighborhood for a while, but nobody seems to own it." "Does it have a name?" Tasha asked, watching as the cat performed its now familiar ritual of stretching and disappearing into the bushes. Martha shrugged. "Not that I know of. Some of the members call it the ghost cat, because it shows up and vanishes so mysteriously. Why don't you name it?" The suggestion caught Tasha by surprise. Naming something created a connection, an acknowledgement of relationship. It had been a long time since she'd allowed herself to form new attachments of any kind. "I wouldn't know what to call it," she said lightly, turning toward the building. But later, as she arranged chairs for the afternoon's memoir writing group, a name floated into her mind, unbidden but somehow perfect. Rowan. She had no idea where it came from. She knew no one by that name, had never even considered it before. Yet it settled in her consciousness with the weight of rightness, as though the cat had always been Rowan, and she had only just remembered. "Rowan," she whispered to herself, testing the sound of it. Yes, it fit somehow. That evening, instead of putting out milk, which she'd read was actually not good for adult cats, Tasha picked up a small can of tuna on her way home. She placed half of it in a shallow dish on her porch, then sat in her rocking chair by the window with a book, glancing up every few minutes to see if her offering had been accepted. It was nearly 9 o'clock, the sky fully dark and the street quiet, when a shadow moved across her porch. Tasha lowered her book and watched, hardly daring to breathe, as the grey cat, Rowan, materialized at the edge of the small circle of light cast by her porch lamp. It approached the dish cautiously, sniffing the air, its movements fluid and silent. After a careful inspection, it began to eat, taking small, delicate bites. Tasha remained motionless behind the window, afraid that any sudden movement might scare it away. When the tuna was gone, the cat sat back on its haunches and began to methodically clean its whiskers. Then, to Tasha's surprise, it turned its head and looked directly at her window, as though it had known all along that she was watching. Their eyes met through the glass, and Tasha felt that same strange sense of recognition. "Rowan," she said softly, though the cat couldn't possibly hear her through the closed window. "Is that who you are?" The cat blinked once, slowly, then rose and slipped away into the darkness. From that night on, Rowan became a regular visitor to Tasha's porch. Never during daylight hours, their morning encounters at the fence continued unchanged, but after dark, the grey cat would appear for the small meal Tasha now prepared each evening. Sometimes it would stay for only a few minutes. Other nights it would linger, watching the street from its perch on the porch railing, or simply sitting in comfortable silence while Tasha read behind her window. She never tried to touch it or coax it inside. Something told her that Rowan would come closer when and if it was ready. There was a boundary between them that felt important to respect. 2 weeks after their first meeting, Tasha arrived home from work to find a message on her answering machine, a rarity in itself as most people used her cell phone now. "Ms. Merrow, this is Dr. Abernathy's office calling to remind you that tomorrow is the anniversary of your sister's passing. As you requested last year, we've arranged for flowers to be sent to the memorial garden. Please call us if you'd like to make any changes to this standing order." Tasha stood in her kitchen, the grocery bag she'd been unpacking forgotten on the counter. How could she have forgotten? Every year since Celine's death, she had marked the day with a small ritual. Flowers sent to the garden where Celine's ashes were scattered, a quiet dinner alone with a glass of her sister's favorite wine, and an evening spent looking through old photographs. That night, Rowan didn't come. Tasha waited until nearly midnight, the untouched dish of food growing cold on the porch, but the grey cat never appeared. Finally, she closed her curtains and went to bed, telling herself it was ridiculous to feel abandoned by a stray animal that owed her nothing. She woke before dawn, her sleep troubled by dreams she couldn't quite remember. The October morning was unusually cold, frost etching delicate patterns on her bedroom window. Tasha wrapped herself in her robe and padded barefoot to the kitchen to start the coffee. As water filled the carafe, movement on her front lawn caught her eye. She looked up to see Rowan sitting at the edge of her small porch, motionless in the grey pre-dawn light. Something about the cat's posture, the way it sat so perfectly still, its gaze fixed on her door, made Tasha shiver despite the warmth of her apartment. Without giving herself time to reconsider, she walked to her front door and opened it. "You came back," she said softly. Rowan blinked at her but didn't move from its spot on the lawn. "Sorry today's a hard day," Tasha continued, feeling only slightly foolish for confiding in a cat. 7 years ago today, I lost my sister. She was everything to me, growing up, my protector, my best friend." As she spoke, Rowan finally moved, padding silently across the grass to the first step of her porch. There it paused, looking up at her with those intelligent amber eyes. "She loved cats," Tasha said, her voice catching, "especially grey ones." For a moment they regarded each other in silence. Then Rowan turned, took a few steps away, and looked back over its shoulder. The message was unmistakable. "Follow me." Tasha hesitated. She was still in her nightclothes, it was barely dawn, and she was considering following a stray cat to who knew where. It was madness. And yet, something about this morning, this anniversary, this cat, felt significant in a way she couldn't articulate. "Wait," she said. "Let me get dressed." 5 minutes later, bundled in a warm coat with sensible shoes on her feet, Tasha stepped out onto her porch. To her relief, Rowan was still there, waiting patiently on the sidewalk. As soon as it saw her, it began to walk, its tail held high like a banner. Tasha followed, wondering what her neighbors would think if they saw her. The retired nurse who kept to herself, now following a stray cat through the streets at dawn. But the town was still asleep. The only sounds the distant call of gulls from the river and the soft pad of her own footsteps. Rowan led her through residential streets, past shuttered shops, and finally to the edge of a small park that overlooked the Columbia River. There it stopped at a wooden bench positioned to face the water. Without looking back at Tasha, it jumped onto the bench and settled into a comfortable curl. Tasha approached slowly, then sat down beside the cat, leaving a respectful distance between them. The horizon was just beginning to lighten, the water shifting from black to deep blue as dawn approached. "Is this why you brought me here?" she asked softly. "Fair for the sunrise." Rowan made no response, but as the first rays of sun broke over the distant hills, painting the river in shades of gold and rose, Tasha felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the morning light. Celine had loved sunrises. "Each one is a promise," she used to say. "Find a brand new day that no one has messed up yet." As Tasha sat beside the silent cat, watching the light change minute by minute, she felt closer to her sister than she had in years. Not the sick Celine of those final months, but the Celine who had taught her to ride a bike, who had defended her against schoolyard bullies, who had always seen the beauty in simple moments. "Thank you," she whispered to Rowan, though she wasn't entirely sure what she was thanking it for. The cat turned its amber gaze to her for a long moment, then stood, stretched, and jumped gracefully from the bench. This time, instead of walking away, it approached Tasha and, very deliberately, pressed its head against her hand for just an instant before disappearing into the park's shrubbery. The brief contact left Tasha's fingers tingling, as though a small electric current had passed between them. But more than that, it left her with a feeling of connection she hadn't experienced in far too long. Later that day, she would call her daughter and son, something she rarely did on this anniversary. She would tell them about her new job, about the charming town of Astoria, about the grey cat she'd named Rowan. She wouldn't mention why she'd chosen that name, or the strange feeling of recognition she felt whenever the cat was near. Some things were too personal, too inexplicable to share. But as she walked home through the awakening town, Tasha felt lighter than she had in years, as though Rowan's brief touch had unlocked something that had been sealed away inside her, something that had been waiting all this time to breathe again. November arrived with a vengeance, bringing with it the fierce coastal storms that Oregon was famous for. Wind-driven rain pelted the windows of the Riverside Senior Community Center, where Tasha and a dozen elderly residents were huddled around tables covered in scraps of fabric, buttons, and spools of thread. A memory quilt, Martha had suggested the previous week. Each member contributes a square representing something important from their life. It'll be a wonderful project for these dreary days. Tasha, whose mother had taught her to sew as a child, found herself actually enjoying the role of helper and guide. She moved from table to table, threading needles for arthritic fingers, offering gentle suggestions and listening to the stories behind each piece of fabric. "This was from my wedding dress," said Elaine Carter, a spry 80-year-old, holding up a square of yellowed satin. "With 57 years we were married before Harold passed." "And this," said George Peterson, the retired fisherman, whose hands still bore the calluses of his trade, "is from my lucky shirt. Wore it every time I took the boat out in bad weather, never lost a man on my watch." As Tasha helped him secure the faded flannel to his square, she noticed Rowan outside the window. The cat sat on the covered porch of the building across the street, seemingly unbothered by the driving rain. It was staring directly at her, those amber eyes unmistakable even through the storm-streaked glass. "Well, I'll be," said George, following her gaze. "That's the ghost cat. Doesn't usually show itself in weather like this." "The ghost cat?" Tasha echoed, though she had heard Martha use the term before. "That's what folks around here call it," George explained, his weathered face creasing in a smile. "Been around for years, but nobody knows where it comes from or where it goes. Just appears and disappears like it's walking between worlds." "Years?" Tasha felt a small jolt of surprise. "But it doesn't look that old." George shrugged. "Cats have 9 lives, don't they? Maybe it's living several at once." The old fisherman chuckled at his own joke, but something in his words stayed with Tasha long after the quilting session had ended. As she walked home that evening, the storm finally subsiding to a gentle drizzle, she found herself thinking about time and memory, about the strange ways that the past sometimes reached into the present. Rowan had become a steady presence in her life over the past month. The cat never failed to appear on the fence each morning, and most evenings it would visit her porch for the small meal she now prepared as routinely as she did her own dinner. It had even allowed her to stroke its fur once briefly, though it still maintained a certain distance that Tasha respected. What George had said about the ghost cat being around for years didn't make sense. Cats lived long lives, certainly, but not that long. Yet something about Rowan did seem timeless, as though it existed slightly apart from the normal flow of days and seasons. Lost in these thoughts, Tasha almost missed the turn to her apartment building. As she corrected her course, a flicker of grey caught her eye. Rowan trotting ahead of her on the rain-slicked sidewalk. The cat paused at the corner, looking back to ensure she was following, then continued on. But it wasn't leading her home. Instead, Rowan took her down a side street she'd never explored, past Victorian houses with elaborate gingerbread trim, their windows glowing warmly against the gathering dusk. At the end of the block, the cat slipped through a gap in a wooden fence surrounding what appeared to be an abandoned property. Tasha hesitated. The house beyond the fence was clearly unoccupied, its windows dark, its garden overgrown. Following a cat onto private property, even abandoned property, seemed like trespassing. Yet curiosity pulled at her, stronger than her usual caution. Finding a gate half hidden beneath a tangle of dormant blackberry vines, she stepped into what had once been a charming backyard. Even in the fading light, she could make out the bones of what must have been a beautiful garden. Stone pathways now cracked and mossy, a small greenhouse with several broken panes, a wrought iron bench rusted but still sturdy beneath an ancient apple tree. Rowan sat in the center of the garden, waiting. "What is this place?" Tasha asked softly, approaching the cat. "Why did you bring me here?" In answer, Rowan rose and moved toward the greenhouse. Following, Tasha peered through one of the intact windows. Inside, shelves sagged under the weight of abandoned clay pots. Gardening tools hung from hooks, undisturbed for what must have been years, and on a small workbench near the back, something glinted in the last of the daylight. The door to the greenhouse was swollen with moisture, and it took Tasha several tries to work it open. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. She made her way carefully to the workbench, conscious of the crunch of broken glass beneath her shoes. What she had seen from outside was a collection of wind chimes, their metal tubes tarnished, but still beautiful. Beside them lay a half-finished one, copper tubes cut but not yet assembled, alongside a spool of thin wire and a pair of needle-nose pliers. Someone was in the middle of a project, Tasha murmured, running her finger along one of the completed chimes. It made a soft, melancholy sound that echoed in the empty greenhouse. Rowan had followed her inside and now jumped lightly onto the workbench, careful not to disturb the items there. The cat sniffed at the chimes, then looked up at Tasha with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Did you know whoever lived here?" she asked, feeling slightly foolish for the question, but unable to shake the sense that Rowan had brought her to this place for a reason. The cat offered no response beyond its steady gaze, but as Tasha looked around the greenhouse more carefully, she noticed something tucked beneath the workbench. A small wooden box, its lid slightly ajar. Kneeling, she pulled it out and opened it fully. Inside were photographs, protected from the elements by their container, but still showing signs of age. Black and white images of a young woman in 1940s clothing, standing proudly in front of the house Tasha had just passed. The same woman, older now, working in the garden. And then a color photograph from perhaps the 1970s. The woman, now elderly, sitting on the wrought iron bench with a grey cat curled beside her. A grey cat with amber eyes and slightly folded ears. Tasha's hand trembled as she lifted the photograph for a closer look. It couldn't be the same cat. That would make Rowan impossibly old. Yet the resemblance was uncanny, down to the small nick in the left ear. As she replaced the photograph in the box, her fingers brushed against something else, a faded blue ribbon, carefully folded and tucked among the images. The same shade of blue that Celine had worn in her hair in that childhood photograph. "This is impossible," Tasha whispered, looking from the ribbon to Rowan, who watched her with unblinking attention. The sound of a door slamming somewhere in the house made Tasha jump to her feet, the box still clutched in her hands. Footsteps approached the greenhouse, and a beam of light swept across the glass. "Hello? Is someone in there?" called a male voice, gruff with suspicion. Tasha froze, suddenly very aware that she was trespassing. "I'm sorry," she called back, her heart racing. The gate was open, and The door to the greenhouse swung wider, and a man in his 50s stood silhouetted against the dim light from the yard. He carried a flashlight which he now shined directly at Tasha, momentarily blinding her. "Guys, what are you doing in here?" he demanded, then lowered the light slightly as he took in her appearance. A woman in her 60s, clearly not a vandal or thief. "I followed a cat," Tasha said, knowing how absurd it sounded. "A grey cat. It came in here, and I was curious." The man's expression shifted from suspicion to something like wonder. A grey cat? With amber eyes? When Tasha nodded, he let out a long breath. "You've seen it too, then?" "Too?" Tasha echoed, confused. The man stepped fully into the greenhouse, lowering his flashlight. "This was my Aunt Eleanor's place. She passed away 15 years ago, but I check on it now and then. Never had the heart to sell it, though I probably should." He gestured at the box in Tasha's hands. "I see you found her memory box." "I'm sorry," Tasha said, offering it to him. "I shouldn't have been prying." He waved away her apology. "No harm done. Aunt Ellie would have liked that someone was interested." He paused, then added, "That cat you mentioned, it was hers. Smokey, she called it. Had it for years. But the strange thing is, after she died, it disappeared. Nobody saw it again until about 7 years ago. 7 years. The exact amount of time since Celine had died." "That's not possible," Tasha said slowly. "Cats don't live that long." The man, he'd introduced himself as Robert, smiled slightly. "That's what I thought too, but I've seen it sitting right where it used to wait for Aunt Ellie on that bench under the apple tree. And others in town have spotted it too, always around people who are, well, people who've suffered a loss." I guess you could say. He looked at Tasha more closely. If you don't mind my asking, have you lost someone recently? My sister, Tasha replied, the words coming more easily than they usually did. 7 years ago. To cancer. Robert nodded as though this confirmed something. Aunt Ellie always said Smokey was special, that it came to her right after her husband died in the war, and that it somehow helped her through it, not just by being company, but by leading her to things she needed to see or remember. He shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. Sounds crazy, I know. Not crazy, Tasha said softly, thinking of how Rowan had led her to the sunrise on the anniversary of Celine's death, how it always seemed to appear when she was feeling most alone. Just unexplainable. They stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the gentle ping of rain on the greenhouse roof. Then Tasha remembered something. The blue ribbon in the box, was that special to your aunt? Robert's face softened with a smile. Her trademark. She always wore a blue ribbon in her hair, right up until she got too old to care about such things. Said it reminded her of something important, though she never told me what. As they talked, Tasha realized that Rowan had vanished, slipped away while she was distracted by Robert's arrival. Somehow she wasn't surprised. The cat had led her to what it wanted her to see. Before she left, Robert insisted she take one of the completed wind chimes. Aunt Ellie would want someone to enjoy it, he said, pressing it into her hands, especially someone who's met her cat. Walking home in the gentle rain, the wind chime carefully wrapped in her scarf to protect it from the damp, Tasha felt as though she'd been given a gift more precious than the metal tubes that would soon sing in the breeze on her porch. She'd been shown a connection to the past, to other lives touched by loss, to the mysterious ways that comfort sometimes found its way to those who needed it most. And somewhere in the shadows between the streetlights, she was certain a grey cat was watching, its amber eyes glowing like small beacons in the darkness. December brought with it a peculiar kind of isolation. While the town of Astoria draped itself in holiday lights and evergreen garlands, Tasha found herself more aware than ever of her solitary state. Her children had already made it clear they wouldn't be visiting for Christmas. Her son's family was spending the holiday with his in-laws in Arizona, and her daughter, living in Boston with 2 teenagers and a demanding career, could only promise to call. "It's not that we don't want to see you, Mom," Lisa had explained during their weekly phone call. "It's just so complicated with the kids, schedules, and the cost of flights this time of year." "I understand," Tasha had assured her, keeping her voice light even as she felt the familiar ache of distance. "We'll catch up after the holidays." At the Riverside Senior Community Center, preparations for a Christmas party were in full swing. Martha had appointed Tasha as the chief organizer, a role that kept her busy, but did little to fill the growing emptiness she felt as the holiday approached. "You've been such a blessing to us," Martha told her one afternoon, as they sorted through boxes of ornaments for the center's tree. "The members adore you. George Peterson told me yesterday that you remind him of his daughter who lives in Michigan. Says talking to you is the next best thing to seeing her." Tasha smiled, touched by the compliment but also reminded of her own daughter, so far away and so caught up in her own life. She wondered when she and Lisa had grown so distant, not just geographically, but emotionally. There had been a time when they'd spoken almost daily, when Lisa had sought her advice on everything from career choices to relationship troubles. But somewhere along the way, those conversations had grown shorter, more perfunctory, until they became the polite weekly check-ins they were now. "You look miles away," Martha observed, handing Tasha a tangle of silver tinsel. "Holiday blues." "Just thinking about family," Tasha admitted. "It's been a while since we were all together." Martha nodded sympathetically. "The curse of modern life. Everyone too busy running to stop and connect." She paused, then added with characteristic directness, "But you've got us now, and we take care of our own here." The warmth of Martha's words stayed with Tasha as she walked home that evening through a gentle snowfall, unusual for Astoria where precipitation usually came as rain. The wet flakes melted almost as soon as they touched the ground, but they transformed the town into a momentary wonderland, streetlights haloed in soft, white light. Rowan hadn't appeared for their morning meeting at the fence for 3 days now, the longest absence since their strange friendship had begun. Tasha told herself not to worry. The cat was a free creature after all, not a pet, but she found herself scanning the shadows as she walked, hoping for a glimpse of grey fur and amber eyes. At home, She hung her damp coat and moved automatically to the kitchen to prepare dinner. As she reached for a can of soup, a wave of dizziness washed over her, so sudden and intense that she had to grip the counter to keep from falling. Her heart pounded irregularly in her chest, each beat sharp and painful. "Not now," she whispered, recognizing the symptoms of her hypertension acting up. She fumbled in her purse for her medication, her vision blurring slightly at the edges. Finding the small pill bottle, she managed to swallow one with a gulp of water from the sink. The episode passed within minutes, but it left her shaken. She'd been managing her blood pressure successfully for years, rarely experiencing such severe symptoms. Her doctor had warned her that stress could trigger spikes, but she hadn't thought of herself as particularly stressed. Then again, the holidays were always difficult, even before she'd moved to a new town where she knew almost no one. And this year, there was the added complication of Rowan, the strange connection she felt to the cat, the way it seemed linked to memories of Celine, the impossible story Robert had told her about his aunt's pet that somehow kept returning long after it should have died. Tasha made her way carefully to her armchair by the window, suddenly feeling every one of her 62 years. Outside, the snow had stopped, leaving the street glossy and dark. She closed her eyes, focusing on her breathing the way her doctor had taught her. When she opened them again, Rowan was there, sitting on her front step, visible through the window under the porch light. Relief flooded through her, so intense it almost triggered another wave of dizziness. Moving slowly, Tasha went to the door and opened it. The cat didn't run away, but watched her with those intelligent eyes as she sank onto the top step, still feeling too unsteady to remain standing. "Where have you been?" she asked softly. Rowan made no sound. Tasha realized she had never heard the cat meow, but moved closer until it was sitting just inches from her hand. Then, to her surprise, it leaned forward and pressed its forehead against her knee, a gesture of such deliberate gentleness that Tasha felt tears spring to her eyes. They stayed like that for several minutes, neither moving. Tasha felt her heartbeat gradually return to its normal rhythm, the tightness in her chest easing with each breath of the cold December air. Whether it was the medication taking effect or something else, she couldn't say, but the cat's presence brought a comfort she hadn't known she needed. "Thank you," she whispered, though for what exactly she wasn't sure. Rowan looked up at her, blinked once, then rose and moved to the door of her apartment, clearly indicating it wanted to come inside. In all these weeks, the cat had never shown any interest in entering her home. Tasha hesitated only briefly before opening the door wider. "Come in then." The cat stepped carefully over the threshold, pausing to sniff the air before proceeding further. It moved through her small living room with deliberate steps, examining each piece of furniture, each corner, as though taking inventory. Tasha watched, fascinated by this inspection. Finally, Rowan completed its circuit and jumped lightly onto the back of her armchair, her favorite spot by the window, where it settled with the air of a creature exactly where it belonged. "Making yourself at home, I see," Tasha said, smiling despite the lingering weakness she felt. She returned to the kitchen, her steps steadier now, and prepared a small dish of the cat food she'd taken to keeping in her cupboard. When she set it on the floor near her chair, Rowan descended gracefully to accept the offering, eating with its usual careful precision. As Tasha watched, she found herself speaking aloud, sharing thoughts she'd barely acknowledged to herself. "My daughter won't be coming for Christmas," she said. "Neither will my son. It's the first holiday I'll spend completely alone since before they were born," she sighed. "I keep telling myself it doesn't matter, that I'm too old to care about such things, but—" Her voice caught, and she fell silent. Rowan had finished eating and was now looking up at her, those amber eyes seeming to hold a wisdom beyond what any animal should possess. "My sister would know what to say," Tasha continued after a moment. "Celine always knew how to make things better. Even at the end, when she was the one suffering, she was still trying to comfort me." She smiled at the memory. "She made me promise not to spend the rest of my life alone. Find new connections," she said. "Don't shut yourself away." Rowan stood and stretched, then to Tasha's surprise jumped into her lap. It turned in a circle twice before settling, a warm weight against her thighs. Tentatively, Tasha stroked its soft fur, and a rumbling purr rose from the cat's chest, the first sound she had ever heard it make. That night, Tasha slept better than she had in weeks, with Rowan curled at the foot of her bed. In the morning, her blood pressure reading was perfectly normal, and the cat was gone. Having slipped out sometime before dawn through a window, Tasha was certain she'd left closed. But on her front step was a small perfect pine cone, dusted with melting snow, exactly like the ones Celine used to collect to make Christmas ornaments when they were children. Tasha picked it up, feeling its weight in her palm. A gift, perhaps, or a reminder that even in the depths of winter, life persisted, waiting for its moment to grow again. At work that day, she found herself volunteering to host a small gathering on Christmas Eve for any center members who, like her, would be alone for the holiday. "Nothing fancy," she told Martha. "Just coffee and cookies, maybe some carols if anyone's interested." Martha beamed at her. "That's a wonderful idea, Tasha. I know at least a dozen folks who would be grateful for the company." As she wrote up a sign-up sheet for the gathering, Tasha felt something shift inside her, a loosening of the tightness that had been growing around her heart. It wasn't the Christmas she'd imagined, but perhaps it could be one worth remembering, and somewhere in the back of her mind she could almost hear Celine's voice. "See? New connections. That wasn't so hard, was it?" The week before Christmas brought a storm so fierce that the power went out across half of Astoria. Tasha woke to darkness and an unsettling silence. No hum of the refrigerator, no tick of the electric clock by her bed. Outside her window, the world was painted in shades of grey, rain lashing sideways against the glass. Moving carefully in the dim light, she found her emergency flashlight and checked her phone. No service. The storm must have affected the cell towers as well. "Perfect," she muttered, pulling on an extra sweater against the growing chill in her apartment. At least her building had gas heating so she wouldn't freeze, but the day stretched before her, empty and disconnected. The center would be closed with the power out, and there was no way to contact Martha or anyone else. Tasha set about making a simple breakfast on her gas stove, warming water for tea, and toasting bread over the flame with a fork, a camping trick her father had taught her long ago. As she ate, she found herself thinking about her plans for Christmas Eve. The sign-up sheet at the center had quickly filled with names. 15 seniors who would otherwise spend the holiday alone, now coming to her small apartment for what she'd started calling an orphan's Christmas. She'd been gathering supplies all week, paper plates and cups, ingredients for cookies and punch, even small gifts for each guest from the dollar store. Now, with the storm raging outside, she wondered if her plans might be in jeopardy. How long would the power be out? Would the roads be clear by Christmas Eve? What if a sharp tapping at her window interrupted her worried thoughts? Tasha turned to see Rowan perched on the narrow ledge outside, rain plastering its thick fur to its body, making it look smaller and more vulnerable than she'd ever seen it. "Oh," she exclaimed, hurrying to the window. It took some effort to open it against the wind, but she managed to create a gap large enough for the cat to slip through. Rowan jumped down to her kitchen floor, shaking itself vigorously and sending droplets flying across the linoleum. "You poor thing," Tasha said, grabbing a dish towel and kneeling to dry the cat. To her surprise, Rowan allowed this attention, standing patiently as she gently rubbed the worst of the moisture from its fur. "What are you doing out in weather like this?" Once the cat was reasonably dry, it stepped away from her ministrations and walked purposefully to her front door, looking back at her with an unmistakable message. "Follow me." "Now?" Tasha said incredulously. "You want me to go out in that storm?" Rowan's gaze remained steady, insistent. "This is madness," Tasha muttered, but she found herself reaching for her raincoat and boots nonetheless. Something about the cat's urgency communicated itself to her, creating a sense that whatever Rowan wanted to show her, it couldn't wait. The wind nearly knocked her off her feet as soon as she stepped outside. Rain stung her face, and her umbrella was useless against the horizontal downpour. Rowan, however, seemed undeterred, trotting ahead with confident steps despite the weather. They didn't go far, just 3 blocks to a small, well-maintained Victorian house that Tasha had admired on her daily walks to work. Unlike the other houses on the street, this one showed signs of life, a warm glow visible through the windows despite the power outage. Rowan led her to the side of the house where a wooden ramp had been built over the original steps. The cat paused at the door, looking expectantly at Tasha. "You want me to knock?" she asked, bewildered. "I don't even know who lives here." But again the cat's gaze was unrelenting. Sighing, Tasha rapped gently on the door, wondering what on earth she would say to whoever answered. It took several minutes, but finally, the door opened a crack and an elderly face peered out suspiciously. "If you're from the power company, I already called yesterday about the flickering, and now look what's happened," the woman said, her voice quavering slightly. "No, I'm Tasha Merrow," she replied, feeling utterly foolish. "I work at the Riverside Senior Community Center. I'm sorry to disturb you, but—" Her explanation was interrupted by a cry from somewhere inside the house, followed by the sound of something heavy falling. "Oh dear, that's Eleanor," the old woman said, her suspicion instantly replaced by distress. "She's fallen again, and I can't lift her with my bad hip. I've been trying to call for help, but the phones are out." Without hesitation, Tasha said, "I'm a retired nurse, let me help." The woman, who introduced herself as Mabel Wilson, opened the door wider, revealing a house lit by several battery-operated lanterns. She led Tasha to a back bedroom, where a second elderly woman lay on the floor beside a walker, her face twisted in pain. "I told her to stay in bed," Mabel fretted, "but she's so stubborn. Wanted to check if we had any more batteries." Tasha knelt beside the fallen woman, instantly slipping into her professional mode. "Hello, Eleanor. I'm Tasha. Can you tell me where it hurts?" "Hip," Eleanor gasped. "And my wrist. Tried to catch myself." A careful examination revealed a likely broken wrist, but thankfully, probably not a broken hip. Still, Eleanor needed medical attention, and with the phones out and the storm making driving treacherous, Tasha wasn't sure how to get it for her. "The fire station is just 2 blocks from here," Mabel said. "They'll have emergency power and radio." "I'll go," Tasha said, rising to her feet. "Can you keep her comfortable until I get back with help?" Mabel nodded gratefully. "Been taking care of her for 60 years now, since we were young nurses together. I can manage a little longer." Only as Tasha was putting her wet coat back on, did she realize that Rowan had disappeared again. The cat had led her exactly where she was needed, then vanished. The trip to the fire station and back with 2 paramedics was a blur of wind and rain. By the time Eleanor had been safely loaded into an ambulance, with Mabel accompanying her despite the weather, Tasha was soaked to the skin and shivering. "You should go home and get dry," one of the paramedics told her. "You did good work today." Tasha nodded, too cold and tired to speak, and began the walk back to her apartment. But as she passed Eleanor and Mabel's house, something caught her eye, a flicker of movement at the window. Drawing closer, she saw Rowan sitting on the interior windowsill watching her. "How did you get in there?" she murmured, approaching the window. As she drew closer, she noticed something beside the cat, a small framed photograph visible in the glow of a battery lantern. Tasha couldn't make out details from outside, but something about it tugged at her memory. She tapped gently on the glass. Rowan looked at her, then deliberately placed its paw on the photograph as though drawing her attention to it. Curious despite her discomfort, Tasha tried the front door and found it unlocked. The paramedics had probably left it that way in their haste. She stepped inside, telling herself she was just making sure everything was secure before leaving. The photograph that had caught her attention sat on a side table beneath the window where Rowan perched. Picking it up, Tasha felt her breath catch. It showed 2 young women in nurses' uniforms from the 1970s, arms around each other's shoulders, standing in front of what was clearly Portland General Hospital, where Tasha had worked for 30 years, and pinned to one woman's cap was a distinctive blue ribbon. Looking more closely at the photograph, Tasha recognized a younger Mabel, her arm around a woman who must be Eleanor, and the ribbon. It was identical to the one Celine had worn in her hair, the one Tasha had found in Robert's aunt's memory box. "This is impossible," she whispered, looking at Rowan. "How are all these things connected?" The cat offered no answer beyond its usual steady gaze, but as Tasha replaced the photograph, she noticed an old leather-bound album on the shelf below. Something compelled her to open it. Inside were photographs documenting a lifetime of friendship between Mabel and Eleanor, vacations, holidays, ordinary moments made special by being shared. And scattered throughout were images of a grey cat with amber eyes, the same distinctive folded ears and nick in one ear that Rowan had. The final page held a newspaper clipping, yellowed with age. The headline read, "Local nurse saves child in highway accident." The photograph showed a much younger Eleanor receiving a commendation, while beside her stood a young girl with a bandaged head, a girl wearing a blue ribbon in her dark hair. The caption identified her as Celine Merrow, age 10, whose life was saved by the quick actions of nurse Eleanor Fields. Tasha sank into the nearest chair, her hands trembling. Celine had never mentioned being in an accident as a child. Their parents had been strict and private people, rarely discussing family matters outside the home. But here was proof that her sister's life had been saved by the very woman Tasha had just helped. A woman who, like Robert's aunt, seemed to have been visited by the same mysterious cat that had now entered Tasha's life. The connections were too specific, too meaningful to be coincidence, yet they defied rational explanation. Rowan jumped down from the windowsill and approached her, purring softly. For once, Tasha had no words, could only stroke the cat's damp fur as she tried to make sense of what she was discovering. A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, reminding her that she was trespassing, however well-intentioned. Reluctantly, Tasha closed the album and replaced it on the shelf. She secured the house before leaving, making sure all windows were latched and the front door locked behind her. The walk home was a blur, her mind too full of questions to notice the continuing storm. By the time she reached her apartment, the rain had soaked through her coat again, but she barely felt the cold. Rowan had somehow beaten her home and sat waiting on her doorstep. As Tasha approached, the cat rose and rubbed against her legs once before slipping inside when she opened the door. That evening, as Tasha sat wrapped in blankets before her gas fireplace, Rowan curled in her lap. She found herself speaking aloud the questions that filled her mind. Were you there when Eleanor saved Celine? Have you been watching over people connected to her somehow? Is that why you came to me? The cat's only response was to press closer, its purr deepening to a soothing rumble that vibrated against Tasha's chest. Later, as she drifted towards sleep, a memory surfaced. Celine in the hospital during her final days, speaking in the dreamy voice of someone floating on a sea of medication. Do you remember the accident? When I was little? Tasha had assumed it was the delirium talking. What accident, see? The one with the nurse who saved me, and the cat that watched over me after. Celine's eyes had drifted closed. A grey cat with golden eyes. It stayed with me until I wasn't afraid anymore. Tasha had forgotten those words until now, dismissed them as the ramblings of a dying woman. But what if they hadn't been? What if Rowan had been there all along, moving through their lives in ways they couldn't understand, connecting them to each other across time and distance? The thought should have frightened her, but instead, Tasha felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. Whatever Rowan was, ordinary cat or something more, it had led her to help someone who had once helped Celine. It had brought her to Astoria, where she was forming new connections, finding purpose again. And tonight, it had given her a precious gift, a piece of her sister's life she hadn't known, a thread that connected them even now. Outside, the storm began to subside, its fury spent. And inside, Tasha slept more soundly than she had in years, with Rowan keeping watch from the foot of her bed. On the morning of December 23rd, with just 2 days until Christmas, Tasha's phone rang. She was in the middle of baking cookies for her Christmas Eve gathering. The power had been restored the day after the storm, and she was making up for lost time. Flour dusted her hands as she reached for the device, expecting Martha with a question about the center's holiday schedule. Instead, her daughter's name flashed on the screen. "Lisa?" Tasha answered, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. Their weekly calls always came on Sunday afternoons, never on Friday mornings. "Mom!" Lisa's voice sounded strange, tight, as though she was holding back tears. "I need to talk to you about something." Tasha's heart clenched with immediate worry. "What's wrong? Are the kids okay?" "The kids are fine. It's me. I've been having these dreams. About Aunt Celine." Tasha sat down slowly at her kitchen table, flour forgotten. "Dreams? They started a few weeks ago. Just ordinary dreams at first. Memories of her visiting when I was little, that kind of thing. But lately they've been different, more intense, like she's trying to tell me something." Lisa paused, then continued in a rush. "Last night, I dreamed she was sitting on our old porch swing, and she told me I needed to go to Astoria for Christmas. That it was important, that you needed me." A chill ran down Tasha's spine. "Lisa, I know it sounds crazy," her daughter interrupted. "That's what I told myself when I woke up. It was just a dream, just my subconscious feeling guilty about not visiting you. But then Then what? Tasha prompted when Lisa fell silent. Then I went into the kitchen to make coffee, and there was a cat sitting on our back deck. A grey cat, Mom. Just sitting there staring at me through the window. I've never seen it before in our neighborhood, and when I blinked it was gone. Tasha's gaze moved automatically to her living room, where Rowan was curled on the windowsill, seemingly asleep, but with one amber eye now half open, watching her. Mom, are you still there? I'm here, Tasha said, her voice barely above a whisper. Lisa, do you remember your Aunt Celine ever mentioning an accident when she was a child? Something about a nurse saving her. The question seemed to catch Lisa off guard. What? No, I don't think so. Why? It's a long story, Tasha said, one I'd rather tell you in person. There was a long pause before Lisa spoke again. That's actually why I'm calling. Mark thinks I'm being ridiculous, but I've booked flights for all of us. We'll be arriving tomorrow afternoon if that's okay with you. Joy surged through Tasha, so powerful it brought tears to her eyes. Of course it's okay, it's more than okay, She broke off, unable to find words for what she was feeling. Mum, is everything all right there? You're not sick or something, are you? Because in the dream, Aunt Celine seemed really insistent that... I'm fine, Tasha assured her quickly. Better than fine now that I know you're coming. It's just been an interesting few months. I have a lot to tell you. After they'd worked out the logistics, yes, the pull-out couch would accommodate Lisa and Mark. The teenagers could use air mattresses in the second bedroom. No, Tasha absolutely did not want them to get a hotel. Lisa hesitated before ending the call. Mom, there's something else. I know we haven't been as close these past few years. After Dad left and then when Aunt Celine got sick, I think I pulled away because I was scared of losing you too. And then when you moved to Astoria, it felt like you were the one pulling away and I'm sorry. Tasha closed her eyes, feeling a knot of tension she hadn't even known she was carrying begin to dissolve. I'm sorry too, sweetheart. We've both been hiding a little, I think. No more hiding, Lisa said firmly. Life's too short, right? That's what Aunt Celine would say. That's exactly what she would say, Tasha agreed, a smile breaking through her tears. After they hung up, Tasha sat motionless at the table, trying to process what had just happened. Her family was coming for Christmas, the family she'd resigned herself to not seeing, the connection she'd thought was growing ever more distant. And somehow, Rowan was involved. The cat that had appeared in Lisa's garden, thousands of miles away in Boston, couldn't possibly be the same one, now stretching languidly on Tasha's windowsill. Yet the timing coming right after Lisa's dream of Celine. What are you? Tasha asked softly, looking at the cat. What is happening here? Rowan returned her gaze calmly, offering no answers. Then, with deliberate steps, it jumped down from the windowsill and walked to the half-open door of Tasha's second bedroom, the room that had stood empty since she'd moved to Astoria, boxes still unpacked, blinds perpetually drawn. The cat looked back at Tasha, then forward again, its message clear. This room needs attention. Tasha spent the rest of the day in a frenzy of preparation. She cleared out the spare bedroom, inflated air mattresses, found extra blankets and pillows. She finished baking cookies for her Christmas Eve gathering and added more ingredients to her shopping list to accommodate 4 additional guests. She swept and dusted and reorganized, all while a sense of nervous excitement built inside her. Her family was coming. After 6 years of holiday phone calls and mailed presents, they would be here, under her roof, sharing this Christmas with her. That evening, exhausted but content, Tasha sat on her small porch, wrapped in a heavy sweater against the December chill. The storm had cleared the air, leaving the sky brilliant with stars and a crescent moon hanging low over the river. Rowan sat beside her, a silent companion in her quiet moment of reflection. I don't know if you had anything to do with Lisa's dream, she told the cat, or with that grey cat she saw. I don't know how any of this is possible, but I'm grateful. Rowan leaned against her leg briefly, then looked up at the night sky, as though studying the stars. Tasha followed its gaze, picking out constellations Celine had taught her to recognize when they were children. Oh, she'd love this, Tasha murmured. Celine always said the stars were better at the coast. As if in response, a shooting star streaked across the darkness, brief but brilliant. Tasha caught her breath at the timing, then laughed softly. Coincidence, she told herself, though she no longer believed it. not with everything that had happened since Rowan had appeared in her life. The next day passed in a blur of final preparations and anticipation. Tasha had arranged to leave work early to meet her family's flight, and Martha had insisted on driving her to the airport in Portland. "I can't wait to meet this daughter of yours," Martha said as they made the drive. "And the grandkids. You never mentioned they were coming for Christmas." "It was a last-minute decision," Tasha explained, unwilling to share the strange circumstances that had prompted Lisa's call. Some things were too personal, too inexplicable for casual conversation. At the airport, Tasha waited nervously at the arrival gate. When Lisa appeared, followed by her husband Mark and their teenagers, Emily and Jason, Tasha felt a surge of emotion so powerful it nearly overwhelmed her. Lisa's face, so like Celine's in certain expressions, broke into a wide smile when she spotted her mother. "Mom," she called, quickening her pace. They embraced tightly, the years of distance seeming to melt away in that moment of connection. When they finally separated, both wiping tears, Lisa looked searchingly at her mother's face. "You look different," she said. "Good different. There's something, I don't know. You seem more alive somehow." Tasha smiled, thinking of Rowan and all that had happened since the cat appeared in her photo. "I feel more alive," she admitted. It's been an interesting few months. The drive back to Astoria was filled with catching up. Emily's debate team victories, Jason's newfound passion for photography, Mark's recent promotion. Tasha soaked it all in, these details of her family's life that couldn't be adequately conveyed through brief phone calls and text messages. When they arrived at her apartment, Tasha felt a moment of anxiety. Would they find it too small, too modest? But Lisa exclaimed over the charm of the building. The teens admired the view of the river from the living room window, and Mark immediately offered to help with dinner. It was only when they were all settled in the living room with drinks, hot chocolate for the kids, wine for the adults, that Lisa brought up the reason for their visit. "So," she said, her voice casual, but her eyes intent on Tasha's face, "are you going to tell me about this grey cat, and why you asked if I remembered Aunt Celine being in an accident?" Tasha hesitated, looking around at her family. How could she explain Rowan, the strange coincidences, the sense of connection to Celine she'd been feeling these past months? It all sounded so implausible, so mystical, far from the practical, rational approach to life she'd always embodied. Before she could formulate an answer, Emily, who had been looking out the window, suddenly spoke up. "Mom, there's a cat on the porch. A grey one. It's just sitting there, looking in at us." Tasha felt a smile spread across her face. "That's Rowan," she said, "and that's where our story begins." Christmas Eve dawned clear and cold, with a pale winter sun casting long shadows across Astoria's sloping streets. Tasha woke early, the habit of a lifetime of early hospital shifts still ingrained despite her retirement. For a moment, she lay still, listening to the sounds of her apartment, the unfamiliar but welcome noises of other people breathing, shifting, existing in her space. Lisa and Mark were on the pull-out couch in the living room. Emily and Jason were in the spare bedroom on air mattresses, and somewhere, Tasha was certain, Rowan was watching over them all. The cat had made a dramatic appearance the previous evening, jumping onto the windowsill, just as Tasha was explaining to her family how she'd first noticed it in her photo. Lisa had gasped. Emily had delightedly taken pictures with her phone, and even skeptical Mark had seemed impressed by the timing. "It's like it knew we were talking about it," he'd said, shaking his head in bemused wonder. Tasha had shared everything. The morning meetings at the fence, the visit to Robert and his Aunt Eleanor's abandoned greenhouse, the blue ribbon and its connection to Celine, the storm that had led her to Mabel and Eleanor, the revelation that Eleanor had saved Celine's life decades ago. With each piece of the story, her family's expressions had shifted from polite interest to genuine fascination. "So you think this cat, Rowan, is somehow, what? Guiding you? Helping you?" Lisa had asked, her tone carefully neutral. "I think," Tasha had replied slowly, choosing her words with care, "that there are connections between people that we don't always see or understand. And sometimes we're given helpers, I suppose, to remind us of those connections." Now, as Tasha slipped quietly from her bedroom, careful not to wake the others, she found Rowan sitting on the kitchen counter, watching as she started the coffee. "Merry Christmas Eve," she whispered to the cat, who blinked slowly in response. The day ahead promised to be busy. Her orphans' Christmas gathering was still planned for that evening. 15 seniors from the center would be arriving at 6, now to be joined by her family as well. Martha had insisted on bringing extra chairs and had recruited George Peterson to help transport people who couldn't walk the few blocks from the center. As Tasha moved quietly around the kitchen, preparing breakfast for her family, she felt a sense of rightness that had been missing from her life for too long. This was what Celine had wanted for her: connection, community, purpose, not isolation and quiet resignation. "Grandma!" Emily's voice, still husky with sleep, came from the doorway. Her granddaughter stood there in penguin-printed pajamas, her dark hair, so like Celine's, tousled from sleep. Can I help with breakfast?" Tasha smiled, warmth flooding through her. "I'd love that. How do you feel about making pancakes?" By the time Lisa and Mark emerged, followed shortly by a grumbling teenage boy hungry Jason, the kitchen was filled with the smell of coffee and pancakes. The morning passed in easy conversation and shared tasks. Jason and Mark volunteered to make a last-minute grocery run, while Emily helped Tasha set up for the evening's gathering. Lisa found the box of Tasha's memories that still sat on her bedroom dresser, the blue album of childhood photographs, lying open to the image of Celine on the fence. "I remember Aunt Celine showing me this picture," she said, running her finger gently over her aunt's young face. "She told me about pretending to be a cat statue to make you laugh." "She did?" Tasha was surprised. "So I didn't know she remembered that day so clearly." Lisa nodded, turning the page to reveal more images from their childhood. "She told me lots of stories about when you were kids, said they were important to remember, that memories keep people with us, even when they're gone." "That sounds like Celine," Tasha agreed, feeling the familiar ache of loss tempered now by the warmth of shared remembrance. As they prepared for the evening's gathering, Tasha found herself watching her family. Mark's patient explanation to Jason about how to arrange the extra chairs for maximum space, Emily's careful decoration of cookies with colorful icing, Lisa's methodical organization of name tags for the guests, the ease with which they had slipped into her life here, making her small apartment feel more like home than it had in the months she'd lived in it. And through it all, Rowan moved silently among them, accepting a gentle stroke from Emily, watching Jason from the bookshelf as he arranged chairs, sitting companionably beside Lisa as she wrote out name tags. The cat seemed to have accepted them all as extensions of Tasha, worthy of its mysterious attention. At 5:30, with everything prepared for the gathering, Tasha found herself alone in the kitchen for a moment. Lisa had taken Emily to pick up a last-minute dessert, while Mark and Jason were setting up a small sound system for holiday music. Rowan jumped onto the counter beside her, and Tasha absently stroked its soft fur. "Thank you," she whispered, "for whatever part you played in bringing them here." The cat leaned into her touch, its purr a comforting vibration against her hand. The doorbell rang at precisely 6 o'clock. Martha, punctual as always, with George Peterson and 3 other seniors in tow. Within half an hour, Tasha's apartment was filled with people, conversation, and laughter. The orphans' Christmas had transformed into something that felt remarkably like a family gathering, with her actual family and her new Astoria community blending seamlessly together. "Your daughter is lovely," Martha told Tasha, watching as Lisa helped Eleanor, who had insisted on attending despite her bandaged wrist, fill a plate with food. "I can see the resemblance." "She takes after my sister more than me," Tasha replied. "Same spirit, same way of connecting with people." Martha nodded thoughtfully. "Family traits have a way of circling through generations. My grandmother always said we're never just ourselves. We're carrying pieces of all those who came before us." The evening progressed with the comfortable rhythm of people enjoying each other's company. Jason, initially standoffish in the way of teenage boys thrust into unfamiliar social situations, found an unexpected connection with George over photography. Emily charmed the entire room with her genuine interest in the seniors' stories. And Mark, whom Tasha had always found somewhat reserved, revealed a talent for drawing out quiet guests with gentle questions and attentive listening. Throughout the gathering, Rowan made occasional appearances, slipping between guests' feet, watching from high perches, never seeking attention but somehow always present at moments of particular connection or emotion. It was nearly 9 when Mabel, who had been deep in conversation with Lisa about nursing school, suddenly called out, "Eleanor, what's wrong?" All eyes turned to Eleanor, who had gone pale, her untouched glass of punch trembling in her hand as she stared at something on Tasha's mantelpiece. "That photograph," she said, her voice quavering. "Where did you get it?" Tasha followed her gaze to the framed image of Celine as a child, sitting on the fence with the blue ribbon in her hair. She had placed it there that morning, wanting her sister's presence to be part of the celebration. "That's my sister, Celine," Tasha said, moving to Eleanor's side. "The one you saved when she was 10. Eleanor's eyes widened. "You're Tasha, little Tasha Merrow." She looked from the photograph to Tasha's face, as though searching for the child in the woman. "I never made the connection. You were so young then, just a little thing, waiting with your parents at the hospital." The room had grown quiet, everyone sensing that something important was unfolding. "I don't really remember it," Tasha admitted. "I was only 6. Our parents didn't talk about the accident much afterward. They weren't the type to dwell on frightening things. And Celine, I think she only remembered bits and pieces." Eleanor shook her head slowly. "It was such a close call. The car hit her bicycle at that dangerous curve on Highway 101, just outside Seaside. I was driving home from my shift and saw it happen. Got to her just in time to clear her airway before the ambulance arrived." She paused, her eyes taking on a faraway look. She was so brave, even then. "Kept asking if her little sister would be scared, made me promise to tell you she was okay." Tears welled in Tasha's eyes at this new glimpse of her sister, always thinking of others, even in her own moment of crisis. "And the cat," Eleanor continued, her voice dropping to nearly a whisper. "It appeared the day after the accident, sat outside her hospital room the whole time she was there. I thought it belonged to someone at the hospital, but no one claimed it. When your sister was discharged, it disappeared. I never saw it again until..." "Until when?" Lisa prompted gently when Eleanor trailed off. "Until my own accident 6 years ago. I fell on the ice, broke my hip, was laid up for months. That's when it started visiting, sitting on my windowsill watching me. Mabel thought I was imagining things at first. I did," Mabel acknowledged with a rueful smile, "until I saw it myself. Same cat that had been at the hospital all those years ago, didn't seem to have aged a day, grey with those unusual amber eyes." "Rowan," Emily said softly, and as if summoned by its name, the cat appeared in the doorway, regarding the gathering with unblinking attention. Eleanor gasped. "That's it. That's the very same cat." A murmur ran through the room as everyone turned to look at Rowan, who seemed entirely unperturbed by the attention. "Fair, but that's not possible," Mark said, voicing what many were thinking. "Cats don't live that long. It would have to be 50 years old at least." "Maybe it's not about age," Jason spoke up unexpectedly. When everyone looked at him in surprise, the teenager flushed but continued. "I mean, what if it's not about how long the cat has lived, but about... I don't know what it represents." "What do you think it represents, Jason?" Tasha asked, curious about her usually reticent grandson's thoughts. He shrugged, uncomfortable with the spotlight, but determined to express his idea. "Maybe it's about connection. Like each of you had some connection to Great Aunt Celine, and the cat is like a symbol of that connection. A reminder that people stay with us even when they're gone." The simple wisdom of his words settled over the room, bringing with it a sense of understanding that transcended the rational questions of how and why. Eleanor smiled, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "That's a lovely thought, young man, and it feels right somehow. Your great-aunt did say something similar when she sent me this." She reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope, yellowed with age. From it she extracted a card, handwritten in a flowing script that Tasha recognized immediately as Celine's. "She sent it to me on the 25th anniversary of the accident," Eleanor explained, handling the card as though it were a precious artifact. "I'd never expected her to remember me after all those years." With careful fingers, she opened the card and read aloud. "Dear Eleanor, you won't remember me, but 25 years ago today, you saved my life on Highway 101. I've never forgotten your kindness or your calm presence in my moment of greatest fear. The blue ribbon you gave me from your uniform to stop my tears became my lucky charm for many years. I still have it, a reminder that life is a circle of giving and receiving care. Sometimes I think I glimpse the cat that watched over me in the hospital, a faithful guardian that appears when needed most. Perhaps it's just imagination, but I like to think some connections transcend ordinary understanding, with eternal gratitude, Celine Merrow. A profound silence followed Eleanor's reading, broken only by the soft sounds of emotion, a few sniffles, a throat being cleared, a shaky breath. Tasha felt as though a final piece had fallen into place. The blue ribbon that had appeared in so many contexts was originally Eleanor's, given to a frightened child as a token of comfort. The same ribbon Celine had worn in the photo, the same shade as the one found in Robert's aunt's memory box, the same color as the one Eleanor was wearing now, pinned to her sweater. And Rowan, the mysterious grey cat that had been weaving through their lives in moments of need, connecting them across time and circumstance. Had Celine somehow known? Had she understood what Tasha was only beginning to grasp now? "I have something to show you all," Tasha said, rising from her seat. She went to her bedroom and returned with the wind chime Robert had given her from his aunt's greenhouse. This was made by a woman named Eleanor too, different Eleanor, but I think the connection is still there. She handed the chime to Martha, who examined it with appreciation before passing it around the circle. "It's beautiful work. I've been thinking about hanging it outside my window," Tasha continued, "but now I wonder if it isn't meant for something more. A reminder that we're all connected, that the circles of our lives overlap in ways we don't always see." As the chime made its way around the room, each person touching the cool metal tubes that would someday sing in the wind, Tasha felt a sense of completion, of wholeness that had been missing for too long. Her family was here, bridging the distance that had grown between them. Her new community had welcomed them with open arms. And Rowan, whatever or whoever the cat might truly be, had somehow helped make it all happen. The gathering continued late into the evening, but with a different quality now, deeper, more intimate, as though the shared revelation had opened something in all of them. Stories flowed freely, of Celine, of other loved ones lost and found, of the small miracles that shaped lives in unexpected ways. When the last guest had departed, with promises to meet again soon, Tasha stood in her doorway with her family gathered around her, watching as Eleanor and Mabel made their careful way down the street, assisted by George. "That was," Lisa began, then shook her head, words failing her. "I know," Tasha said simply. Later, after dishes had been washed and furniture rearranged, after Emily and Jason had finally been persuaded to go to bed, despite their protests that it was Christmas Eve and they should be allowed to stay up, Tasha found herself alone on her small porch. The night was clear, stars brilliant against the black velvet of the sky, and the air carried the faint scent of wood smoke and pine. Rowan appeared silently beside her, leaning against her leg in a rare gesture of affection. "I understand now," Tasha told the cat softly, "or at least I'm beginning to. You're not just a cat, are you? You're a reminder of Celine, of connections, of the way love continues even when people leave us." Rowan looked up at her, amber eyes reflecting starlight, then turned to gaze out at the night. "You won't stay forever," Tasha continued, the knowledge settling in her heart with a bitter-sweet certainty. "You'll move on when I don't need you anymore." When I found my way back to connection, the cat pressed closer, a gentle pressure against her ankle, neither confirming nor denying. "But that's okay," Tasha whispered, feeling tears prick her eyes, even as a smile formed on her lips. "Because you've already given me what I needed. You brought my family back to me. You helped me find a community. You reminded me what Celine always knew, that we're never truly alone as long as we keep our hearts open to connection." Inside the apartment, she could hear Lisa and Mark talking softly, the occasional laugh drifting through the window. Her family, beneath her roof. Tomorrow they would open presents, share a meal, create new memories to carry forward. And in the days that followed, they would talk about ways to bridge the distance that had grown between them. More frequent visits, perhaps, video calls with the grandchildren, maybe even a summer vacation together on this beautiful coast. Tasha reached down to stroke Rowan's soft fur, feeling the vibration of its purr against her palm. "Thank you," she said simply. The cat blinked slowly, a gesture of feline affection that needed no translation. As they sat together in comfortable silence, a shooting star streaked across the sky, brief, brilliant, gone in an instant, but leaving its impression on the darkness. Just like certain people in our lives, Tasha thought, just like Celine. When she finally went inside, Rowan followed, padding silently to the armchair by the window, where it had first claimed a place in her home. It curled into a perfect circle, tail wrapped around its body, amber eyes half closed but watchful. Tasha moved through her apartment, checking on her sleeping grandchildren, smiling at the sight of Lisa and Mark already asleep on the pull-out couch, hands clasped even in slumber. She turned off lights, locked the door, completed the small rituals that marked the end of a day. In her bedroom, she paused at the dresser where the old photograph of Celine sat. Her sister's young face smiled back at her, the blue ribbon catching light in her dark hair, her posture mimicking the cat that would one day carry her spirit back to those who had loved her. "You were right, C," Tasha whispered. "We did find another cat after all." And somewhere in the quiet darkness of Christmas Eve, she was certain she could hear her sister's laughter, as clear and bright as the chime that would soon sing in the wind, connecting past and present, absence and presence, ending and beginning. Full circle, Tasha thought as she drifted towards sleep. We've come full circle at last. The end.